could play a constructive and humane role. The fact of the matter is, though, that the guns that were trained on them, the M16s, were supplied by the United States. The go-ahead for the original invasion was given by the United States. The planes and helicopters which brought them down from the hills and into the prison camps were supplied by the United States. And on a day-to-day basis, the U.S. is backing this occupation of East Timor, which is illegal. It's a rather simple matter. The UN Security Council has passed 2 resolutions calling on Indonesia to withdraw without delay. These resolutions were not enforced. In his memoirs, Daniel Patrick Moynihan writes, he was the U.S. ambassador to the UN at the time, that he received orders from the State Department to see to it that the UN prove utterly ineffective in any measures it might undertake to enforce these resolutions. He said he carried this task out with no inconsiderable success. After the November 12 massacre, General Trisu Trisno, the highest-ranking officer in the Indonesian military, the overall commander of the Indonesian military, gave a speech to a gathering of military graduates, a formal set-piece speech. He said, referring to those who had gathered outside the cemetery in Dili, he said, "These are despicable people, quote, people who must be crushed." He said, quote, "Delinquents like these agitators have to be shot, and we will shoot them." He added, "Come what may, let no one think they can ignore the Indonesian armed forces. In the end, they will have to be shot down." This was a statement of policy from the highest-ranking Indonesian officer. He repeated words to the same effect twice more, in the end saying, as soon as the army completed its investigation, they will move to annihilate all separatist elements in East Timor that have tainted the dignity of Indonesia. President Suharto himself referred to the massacre as a small thing. He told about on how on his world tour he would meet with world leaders and they would ask him what's going on in East Timor, and he then said he would point to the map. He said, "I showed them a map where East Timor is located, the tiny island called East Timor, that small thing that caused everybody to make a fuss." And he said they all laughed when he pointed out to them what a minuscule place this really was. As Indonesia got some international criticism, because we as foreigners happened to be there and witness and survive this, they responded, first with a report which said it was a group of renegade soldiers, second by transferring some generals out, finally by submitting several officers and soldiers to military discipline. They sent a new commander into East Timor, General Saiafi. He said that his predecessor had been too patient, had been too lenient, and he said that under his new regime in East Timor, they would no longer tolerate such demonstrations. He said that anyone who is an opponent of Indonesia would be hunted down. He said in a recent interview in the March 14th edition of Editor, quote, "If something similar to the 12 November event were to happen under my leadership, the number of victims would probably be higher." This is the new general they brought into East Timor in the ostensible reform, the ostensible constructive response to the massacre. Since the massacre, there have been reports which Amnesty International has characterized as credible of executions of eyewitnesses and survivors of the massacre. Others have been put on trial and are facing the death penalty. The head of the Indonesian Armed Forces has declared this was an act of policy. The new commander says they'll crack down and they'll kill even more next time. And the U.S. has responded by saying it wants to increase the military training aid. Why does it want to increase the aid? Because it will civilize the Indonesian military, as one congressional aide explained to me recently. This point of view, I think, is very unfair to the Indonesians. This idea that the U.S. has something to teach to the Indonesian military that will bring them to a more humanitarian plane of behavior. But if we look fairly and objectively at the record on East Timor, we're not just talking about the behavior of General Sutrisno. We're not just talking about the values of President Suharto. We're also talking about the values of Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger and Ronald Reagan and George Bush and those who staff the U.S. State Department, who day after day, as this running massacre has continued, have responded with fresh shipments of weaponry and fresh infusions of U.S. cash. For fiscal year 1990, the last year for which figures are available, there were more than $230 million worth of foreign military sales, shipments, government-to-government military aid into Indonesia. For fiscal year 1991, the Pentagon estimates there will be $50 million in foreign military sales agreements. For fiscal year 1991, in addition, the Pentagon estimates there will be $71 million in commercial military sales, which are licensed by the U.S. government. Now, this happens to be a rather unusual case. It's unusual because we happen to be there. In terms of the internal history of East Timor, this was not an especially remarkable massacre in many respects. It certainly does not rank among the larger ones. There was the massacre at La Cluta, where, according to eyewitnesses, the soldiers slit open pregnant women with their machetes. After the Archbishop of East Timor denounced that massacre, Benny Murdani, who was then becoming Defense Minister of Indonesia, moved to have him removed from his post, and he succeeded in doing so. There was the massacre at Paras, in which many hundreds were killed. There are the running massacres in the internal countryside of East Timor. In this one, perhaps 200 people were massacred, but it happened to happen before our eyes. There happened to be a video cameraman there who was able to capture the people stumbling, covered with blood, into the cemetery. What this means is that the facts cannot be in dispute. Even the State Department, in talking about what has happened at this massacre, has not disputed the essential facts. They have pointed to a few claims by the Indonesians. One claim the Indonesians have made, for example, is that the soldiers were provoked because a soldier, they say, was stabbed along the route of march. Now, I happened to witness the clash along the route of march in which that stabbing allegedly took place. It didn't look to me at the time whether as if someone had been stabbed, but what was clear is that the other soldiers did not react. The march simply continued on to the cemetery. More than 40 minutes later, people were gathered outside, people were standing around quietly. Then the soldiers appeared up at once, and it was clear from the way they behaved that they had marched up with orders to commit a massacre. It was a very disciplined, orderly, cool, precise operation. The next day, General Sutrisno comes out and affirms that it was indeed an act of state. So the essential facts are not really in dispute. The only thing that is on the line now is what will the U.S. response be? For the first time in Congress, there are serious moves to cut U.S. military aid to Indonesia. 52 senators have signed a letter to President Bush calling on him to support self-determination for East Timor in the United Nations. A bipartisan group in the House, including Tony Hall, Democrat of Ohio, Frank Wolf, Republican of Virginia, Ron Makeley, Republican of Rhode Island, Tom Downey, Democrat of New York, Barney Frank, Democrat of Massachusetts, John Porter, Republican of Ohio, and various others will be moving to cut the U.S. military aid. The simple question now facing these legislators and now facing members of the American public is whether the U.S. wants to continue being an active participant, a criminal participant, in the ongoing mass murder of the East Timorese. This is not a subtle matter. This is not a difficult, agonizing matter. It is not a matter of ambiguity. It's a matter of the most simple moral choice. We happen to see it. We happen to see those people exploding in front of us in the street, running with blood, and them aiming and shooting these poor kids and older people in the back. It was unbelievable. It's indescribable. I just cannot convey to you what it was we saw. The video gives you a fraction of what happened there. It can't convey the full sense. But these were American M16s. These were your taxpayers' dollars at work. And now there's a choice in the Congress and a choice before the public. If the U.S. will continue, if the U.S. will support self-determination, free elections, free choice for the East Timorese, or whether it will continue to stand for mass murder in East Timor. It's really that simple. Thank you.
Well, there's a certain division of labor here, and I was originally going to say something about U.S. policy, but in view of Allan's and Noam Chomsky's